Hello and welcome to today's Missio Nexus webinar, Selecting Effective Stock Imagery. I'm Heather Pubels, the founder of Leitmotif, a communications consulting firm and Missio Nexus member organization. I'm also the editor of Evangelical Missions Quarterly for just a little bit longer, and I recently became the president and CEO of Media Associates International, a global network of Christian writers, editors, and publishers. For the last 3 years, I've been partnering with Missio Nexus to offer webinars that feature ways that mission agencies can improve their marketing and communications efforts. Before we get started with the webinar, I want to let you know that Missio Nexus has a group called Communications. If you are involved in marketing or communications with a mission agency, this is a group that's been designed for you. It's a great place for you to meet, learn from, and be encouraged by others in your domain. At the end of this webinar, I'll give you instructions on how to find and sign up for that group. A handout for today's presentation will be available near the end of our time. For today, Jeremy Cherry will be presenting our webinar. He is the leader of Brand Studio at Journey Group. Relentlessly hopeful about the power of design, Jeremy lives by the words, "A better way is possible." With over a decade of experience telling stories through brands, Jeremy has worked with clients from a wide variety of industries based all over the globe. He writes and speaks about the intersection of design and ethics. Seeking to add hope back to the conversation, he wrote a book called Designing Hope and penned a manifesto called Brands Are Human. So, Jeremy, just by way of introduction here, can you tell us about a recent project you've been working on?
Absolutely. We are currently working on a brand for an all abilities play space here in Charlottesville, which is very exciting. It was founded by a mother who unfortunately lost a child that had disabilities, and until this project was approved, this family had to drive, I think, an hour south to the closest all abilities playground. So we're really excited. They've started working on an accessible treehouse is the first phase, and then the next phase is for them to raise the full funding for the full project. So it's exciting both for our community, but also just to be a part of it at this
Yeah,
stage.
that's great. You know, we just recently did an EMQ on people with disabilities and missions, and so I'm glad to hear about that effort. That sounds really good. For
Absolutely.
everyone else, please remember to put your questions in the chat panel. We'll get to as many of them as we can. And Jeremy, it's great to have you here with us today, and you can go ahead and share your screen.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I'm just so appreciative, Heather, of everything that you've been doing to organize this, and also just to Missio Nexus for hosting conversations like this. I hope that you find the content and the resources really valuable. One thing I want to start off on the topic, we're going to be talking about how to select effective stock imagery, and we'll get into the definition of what all of that means. But really, my heart in this is to help organizations figure out how to source stock imagery to just effectively communicate their brand's mission. There's lots of different ways that you can do that to great effect. But before I get too much further, I'll tell you a little bit about me. I really appreciate the introduction, and hopefully that gave you a little bit of context. But from a communication standpoint, I'll give you kind of a background of my expertise. I currently lead the brand studio at Journey Group. I'll tell you a bit more about our organization in just a few moments, but I've been a designer my whole career. I've always had my feet in both branding and interactive design. So really, when I think of how to design for brands and for visual identities, which really at Journey Group we just mean what does your organization look like? We really mean that holistically. We mean that across media. We mean that across experiences. We get to work on all kinds of fun projects, whether it be branding, physical spaces, like I was just mentioning, or things that exist on screens are deeply interactive, which has been a lot of fun. I want to give you just a little bit of an overview, kind of a table of contents of what we'll be covering today. But before I get into that, I want to say that I know that it's hard in this format for this to feel conversational, but I hope that this will feel like a conversation. In this space, things change so frequently, and that's not to intimidate anyone listening. That's more to say that I've been thinking about this particular topic my whole career, and it's been amazing of how quickly things can change, and how many resources there are out there with every kind of technological shift, there's always resources that come with that that can be used to great effect. So I'll give you a little bit of an overview just so you have some background on the type of work that I do. Hopefully that will help contextualize where some of this kind of learned experience is coming from. Then what we'll do is kind of dive into the chapters of the talk, which will be centered around defining the terms. What do we mean when we're talking about things like stock imagery? Number two is a big one, which is how do you evaluate the value when you're considering investment in things like imagery for your organization, especially if you're a communicator? Where do you get the most value for that investment, whether that be time or finance or just energy? And the third would be considering an approach. What feels right for your particular organization? I hope this goes without being said that there is no one size fits all. So none of this will be kind of a really quick way to solve this. It can be a very nuanced challenge, especially given what your organization does in the world. But hopefully these helpful tools can be something to get you started. We'll wrap up with me just talking about a couple helpful tools that are out there, some of which you may be familiar with, or even have ways that your organization are currently using. I'll end with kind of the top three practical tips that I leave most of the folks that I partner with as clients and as collaborators with. And then we'll have a brief Q&A where you can ask questions. And again, I'll have my contact information at the end of this presentation too, so that if you think of questions afterwards that you want to reach out about, I would be happy to hear from you. So a little bit of context of what I do. Journey Group that is the design company I work for. We are a design partner to some of the world's greatest institutions, and we believe in institutions. We work in lots of different areas, but primarily we focus on education, humanitarian, and what we would call cultural institutions. Things like museums. Our largest client is the United States Postal Service. So we have a great admiration for institutions and the work they do in the world. And we've been rooted in that work manifesting itself through telling excellent stories since the beginning, since 1992. We were founded as a design agency specializing in editorial work. So our first projects were magazines. And as new technologies were starting to develop, we've adjusted and formed different studios around those practice areas. So in terms of approach, we have been so fortunate to work with so many wonderful institutions, and really that is just born out of relationships. It's born out of strong partnerships. We have clients that have been here since 1992 and are still active clients, and that's been such an honor for us to have that long-term approach to work. I would say this has a wide variety of scales, whether that's a state institution or college or university, whether that is some sort of NGO, whether that is a faith-based company. We really love having a variety of different types of institutions that we work with, whether they're even local, like the example I mentioned earlier. And again, we've been honored to have folks stay with us and really see them as a part of the family. In terms of capabilities, Journey Group does lots of different things. Though I'm just representing one studio today with the brand studio, we have an application studio, a web studio, and an editorial studio. So this list, I won't read all of those things. They're just a sampling of some of the things that we do for folks. So what I hope you hear is not a sales pitch, but really just to say when we're thinking about these types of considerations, especially the topic we're talking about today, we're thinking about it in all of these areas, which can be very challenging. It can be very intimidating, but also gives you a really holistic way to view it. Because of our editorial background, we also have a bit of a journalistic way of viewing it. Images are powerful. They are emotive. They're evocative. They matter a whole lot to what we're doing and what we're designing. So they matter a great deal. Last thing is that as a brand studio, we are designed as a small team to serve organizations by designing brand identities. So what an organization looks like, but also that extends into different media and materials. So again, on today's topic, considerations that you make about imagery have direct effect on things like the media and materials that you're creating. The things we get most excited about are breathing life into an established brand, whether it be a historical brand, whether it be a new brand, or even something that's representing a community that has a long history of serving another community. We get really excited in serving organizations that way through branding. So let's hop over to define some of the terms. This is where we are believers here at Journey Group, and I have a wise mentor that says that language is upstream of culture. And I believe that the language, the shared vocabulary that we have, helps our conversations. They help us know whether we are defining things in the same way or even thinking about things in the same way. So I wanted to start with more of the poetry behind it. I love this quote from Joseph Campbell. You may be familiar with some of his work. He is, a known writer and thinker, especially about storytelling and narrative design. And Joseph says, when an idea is important to a person or a culture, it will find its way into imagery. I love this because this is so true. It doesn't matter how far back you go in history. Humans have always been telling stories, and we've always been using images to do it, whether it is old cave drawings, whether it is paintings. Part of imagery, and especially in the modern era, photography is how we relate to the world. That's how we capture the human experience. So it matters a great deal, and there's a reason, a real human connection, why it's so important to the work that we do and why it can communicate what we do as organizations. The other thing that is really core to this conversation, and we all know this, but it's worth pausing and sitting with it as a truth, would be that images just tell stories. Even a static image or a moving image or even an illustration. Really, when I say the word image, and we'll define this in just a moment, I'm really meaning that pretty holistically. I'm not just speaking about photography, though that's a huge category of images. Um, Images tell stories. They take us to a place. Their whole goal is to illustrate an idea, and to take us there and to give us a visual reference for something that may be often hard to articulate or hard to write down in words. There's reasons we have cliche phrases like, a picture tells 1,000 words. It's because they're immediately immersive. You can see a photo, and if it is composed artfully, you feel like you're in the landscape, you're in the room, you're feeling the light. It's no different than looking at a Rembrandt painting where you feel the light, you feel the warmth of how it was captured in that medium. So images tell stories, and I believe stories are what make us human. They're how we relate to one another, whether we're communicating across cultures or even language barriers. Images are often how we are able to communicate with one another, whether that be subconsciously or consciously. They make us up. Every human that you encounter is made up of stories, countless stories. It is meaningful work. It's how we relate to one another. Um, so images matter in the work that we create. So when we're thinking about things like stock imagery, it's helpful to come into it with that frame of mind, that as we define the terms, we can't lose the root mission of what we're trying to accomplish with images in the first place. So just to put a definition to it, when I say stock imagery in the terms of this conversation today, I'm meaning a supply of images that are often licensed for a specific use. So that's the stock part of the imagery, is that there is a licensed agreement for using these particular images that have been created for use. There's different types of stock imagery, as we were talking about. Those can fall into broad categories, things like photography, videography, graphics, or even illustrations that are really specific. I would put all of these into the category of imagery. They're all things that are telling a story through a visual language, capturing a human experience or a setting. There's all kinds of different types of licensing and even just usage agreements that come with them. There's things like royalty free that are free for anyone to use, that have been offered out to the community by a creator to use in a variety of contexts. Sometimes that is with attribution, sometimes that's without attribution. There's all kinds of different places that you can offer that work. Public domain is another great source, that if something has been offered to the public domain or is aged into the public domain from a legal standpoint, it can be used by a general audience and repurposed in lots of ways. So that's another resource that's worth looking into. Specifically, libraries or museum systems often have a very rich archive of things like this, whether it be photography or illustrations, or even scans of particular materials. There's a typo on that bullet list, so I apologize, but Creative Commons is another great source where often creators create things for the community and to be used and to be reinvented and can be offered at that Creative Commons licensing that you may encounter. And then the last one would be a paid licensing, which would be an actual agreement that you are paying a particular price to license out for a scope of time and for a particular cost. Often with paid licensing, if you're unfamiliar with that process, that can look like specific to the media that you're creating, the reach that it has within an audience. There's all different types of licensing, some that are specific to the platform that you're using. So some may have licensing agreements that are specific to that particular platform and what it offers creators. So when we're talking about this particular kind of spectrum here that we're navigating, when we talk about imagery, whether it be any of those types we just discussed, we're really talking about the poles of being custom, which I've defined today as just media that's created uniquely for your organization. You hired it out, for instance, or you had someone contribute as a volunteer to capture images, to create images. On the other end of the spectrum is where we get into stock imagery, and that is media that's been licensed for your organization. So when we talk about each of these, it's helpful to think about them as a spectrum because there are things that fall in between those two poles on the spectrum. But just to dive in a little bit further on each of these, custom can often be a really fantastic investment. I think a lot of times if you are coming into a conversation where budget or resources are limited, often the first thing I found in my experience is that clients often think that custom work is off the table, that it may be too expensive, it may be too time consuming. There could be any number of variables or barriers to it. But what's often interesting is that there are partners and collaborators all over the place that are willing to work with folks. So there's even things that fall within that custom category that can be really interesting and creative ways to create creative partnerships with folks. That doesn't just mean having to hire a creator to capture imagery or to create unique artwork for you. On the other end, though, there is a wide and kind of endless resource of stock images out there. Depending on how you talk about stock imagery and how you use stock imagery, it can be a very sensitive topic depending on the subject matter of your organization, which we'll dive into some of the considerations of thinking well about that. But stock is, again, something that can often be endless. When you go to a stock image platform, there's often so many different varieties and creators that are contributing to that in very specific ways, and that continues to grow exponentially every day. So let's talk about what are reasons why you may choose stock imagery. If you are someone that is concerned about authenticity in your organization, even the word or the phrase stock imagery could give you some alerts of is that appropriate for us? And that is a great and wise question to ask. So this list that we'll go through is something just to consider when you're thinking about that of considerations. Um, One would be why to use stock imagery would be budgetary reasons. Maybe you can afford to license some imagery, but to hire out custom pieces, it would be too expensive or would create too many variables. The other could be your location. There's all different variables that come along with setting, whether it is the ease of traveling to the particular location to capture imagery or to source that, whether it be the sensitivity given the location that you're working in as another variable. Uh, that dovetails into the third bullet point, which would be the type of work that you do. There are certain aspects of organizations that are really hard to capture, whether that be because of compositional reasons or privacy reasons. There's just type of work that can be sensitive that's really hard to capture, that you need to be really thoughtful about how it's captured with imagery or even illustrations. Again, resources, whether that be access to people that could create imagery for you, whether it be a photographer, a videographer, an illustrator, things like that. And sensitivity, this is very related to that prior point of type of work, which would be the sensitivity, or even in the next point, the privacy around what you do. There are cases where having photography featuring faces, for instance, that are easily identifiable can be very problematic to the type and can put people in real danger. So you really have to be thoughtful about how you use imagery and what permissions you get from the folks captured in there, which is where stock imagery can be very helpful when you're trying to capture someone or a place without a particular person featured, for instance. Representation's another great thing that maybe you are looking for a resource that has lots of diversity in the types of images and in the people and places that are featured. That's another reason that people typically can turn to something like stock imagery to show a great representation of the work that they do. This offers the question, which we kind of we're kind of edging closer to, which would be, what imagery is appropriate for your organization? I think that is a fantastic question to not only ask your organization, but to sit with. That it is not just a foregone conclusion that photography, for instance, has to be used within your brand expression, though it is a very powerful resource and often is the right resource. It's really helpful to ask yourself, in the areas that you work in, what is appropriate to the type of work that you do? What's the nature of the work that you do? Are images the best way to capture that? Or is it a really complex organizational structure or mission that needs to be illustrated or could be visually simplified for folks to latch onto? Often you'll see illustrations or iconography used to great effect to show really complex ideas in a really simple form that can create a nice memory of something that you're trying to get across. This is something that we just talked about of our reason for going towards stock imagery, which would be subject sensitivity. Maybe you work in a very sensitive area or part of the world or on a cause that is deeply sensitive, that has lots of nuance to it and privacy even. And you want to make sure that you are representing things in a abstract way, for instance, that doesn't feature specific faces or specific locations that could be really problematic. That could be another thing to consider when you're thinking about the imagery that you may want to source, would be how to tell enough of a story. For instance, if you're featuring photography or videography that has humans in it, how do you represent that while still honoring the subject matter? Um, Bullet four is a huge one that we're going to spend a lot of time on, which would be considering, how do you build trust with your community? Messaging does a whole lot of this, but your brand expression is often holding this together as glue, as the visual glue to build that trust. And even in some cases, the transparency required for your organization to feel like they can be trusted by the people that they support. Imagery can do a lot to support that, and it can also do a lot to erode that. We've all probably experienced sites that look like they're full of stock photography, but all of the things that are featured on them feel like they're unrealistic or maybe aren't as connected or inconsistent with each other. That can really quickly erode trust. So you want to be careful about how you're using imagery and in what particular context in a way that's building trust, giving people more of a connection to the mission that you're putting out into the world. And again, not eroding any of the trust or the trustworthiness that your mission is about. Um, Asking, what does authenticity look like for your audiences? Often using a handful of images go a long way, and feeling like you're allowing some images that may be even more textural, or maybe just a way to capture a place or a feeling, that can be enough to communicate a mission. When you start to get into more specific stock images and things that feel like they may be staged or like they may be forced into a particular context, that's where authenticity can also start to erode. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing feels really authentic to what you're using. Even how you mix professional stock photography with sourced photography or user-generated content is a great consideration. Finding ways to make sure that you've got really specific and good thinking around when you use what types of images and how that builds authenticity. And the last one is the most human, but the most important, which is, how do you provide dignity to those being represented, whether they are folks that are featured in custom photography or imagery or are represented through illustrations, or whether they're just the models and the folks that were involved in the stock imagery. Making sure that you're providing dignity to those represented is a really huge part of how you use those images and how you feature, especially humans involved in this particular stock imagery. So let's talk about the value of this when you're considering stock imagery, if it's right for your organization, and how to go about sourcing that. What is the value of that? So again, coming back to the spectrum where we've got kind of custom imagery on one side, highly tailored, and then we've got stock imagery that's been purposed. What you have to think along that continuum is the topic of really today, which is trust. How do you navigate that spectrum in a way that feels like you are building trust with your audiences? It feels like you're building trust with the people that you're communicating with, and that you're building trust with the people you're serving, even. That continuum between whether to hire out custom particular pieces in stock can be a huge consideration when you're navigating that spectrum of trust. And again, there's ways to do that that are both honoring to the medium itself and to the people that you're serving. That being said, when you're thinking about stock, it's also helpful to think about that there's lots of different options for stock. There's everything from things that you pay for, like premium stock, to things that can be a collaboration. So an example of a collaboration would be, let's say you found an image library that is wonderful for your brand. Maybe it's of a particular location or a particular type of work. Often you can collaborate with a particular creator directly and license directly from them, whether it be a photographer or an illustrator, a videographer, and license out some of those pieces. Again, we've even done that with in terms of art direction for some of our clients, where we are directing a particular type of art piece and we find something that is perfect for a magazine, for instance, and you're able to contact an artist directly and license that out. There's lots of different ways that you can work directly with particular creators that you find online. It has never been easier to do that, which is fantastic. So whether you are combing the internet for particular creators or on something like Pinterest where you're gathering inspiration, often directly talking to a particular creator can get into a really fun collaboratory or collaboration arrangement with them. And in the middle of that spectrum would be free. There are tons of resources that have free stock imagery that is really excellent and really well created. And it's been created for use, has been created by particular artists that are really passionate about it having a life beyond just their hard drive. And it's wonderful to see how many people contribute to communities with their talents. So let's talk about what it looks like to select a stock photography or a stock imagery site or platform or source even. Um, First, it's really helpful to think about what type of imagery does it specialize in. When you'll find and you're searching through particular platforms, what you'll often find is that there is probably a specialty that that particular site or platform specializes in. That can be media specific, so that can be something like photography, videography, or illustration, or sometimes that can even be audience or subject matter driven, meaning that maybe it specializes in particular images for missions or for ministry or for a particular type of work. Another question to ask would be, what variety does that imagery offer within the platform itself? Is there a lot of versatility within it? Is it able to be used and to be sustainable as you're picking it? The other question would be, what representation or diversity does it offer? As we know that there can often be a lack of particular backgrounds and ethnicities and all kinds of categories represented through stock imagery. It's really helpful when you're building trust and authenticity to make sure that you're representing the community you serve and that you are well, and making sure that you're sourcing images from a place that has a lot of that versatility, I think is really meaningful. Um, how does it handle licensing or attribution? But this can change platform to platform. So making sure that you understand and are clear about the licensing agreement and feel that it is offered fairly to you is something that is really important. Also, from a practical standpoint, how does it handle pricing? Because a lot of platforms are subscription based, you can actually get a lot of value out of a subscription over time, and whether you're allowed to download different images or have access to the full library for a specific period of time or through a specific type of licensing, for instance. So let's consider an approach when we're talking about if you're considering stock imagery, sourcing it for your organization, what's a good approach given all of these considerations that we've talked about? So let's come back to this question. Trust, authenticity. What does authenticity look like for your organization? One of the best ways to explore this with one as an organizational team to think about the answer to this question and then also to gut check that with your community. Whether that's through just an easy survey or through conversations, it can be so helpful to talk directly to your audience and to get a sounding board on what is helpful to building authenticity and what does that look like for your organization. Really, it's from that answer and it's from that feedback that you can start to build out an idea of what imagery can support that, both support that mission and on the receiving end of it for your audiences. What helps build trust in your organization? What helps to visualize, especially if you work in an area of sensitivity or even a service that's quite abstract, it's helpful to find out how imagery can support that and can help actually educate folks around the work that you're doing. often we work with tons of partners that is their exact challenge, is that they work in a really nuanced area or work in a particular area that's really complex. And it's often just the idea of communicating that in a way that's simple, that is clear, and is memorable for folks as they're looking through that. So again, this is the conversation, the question that really orients a lot of the considerations of how you approach using stock imagery. I love this quote by writer, thinker, podcaster Debbie Millman, who is just a wonderful designer and design educator. She talks about visual storytelling utilizes both language and art to pass on the essence of who we are. This roots it back into the just purely human connection that images bring. Visual storytelling is always been a part of the human experience. It's how we experience relationships. It's how we experience all kinds of experiences on in this earth. And so it's really helpful for us to think about imagery in that way that is really powerful and it can be used for great good and for great ill. So it's worth thinking well about. So let's talk about how do you create helpful guidelines around that. One first consideration, especially given just the wide variety of areas that I'm sure folks listening today work in, would be how do you handle images of people? Are you showing faces? Are identities known? Is it appropriate for identities to be known? How can you be sensitive to the particular subject matter? Often this is even helpful to think about that, up close photos of features like hands or faces that are nondescript or, groupings or poses of photos where it doesn't show faces can be really evocative and can actually show the setting of where you are without actually having to feature any particular people. This can also be helpful from an authenticity standpoint. It doesn't make the image scream that it is completely out of place or that it is not similar to a context in which you work in. The second consideration would be how are you using images to tell stories? How are they attached to actual written stories? How are they being used in and of themselves to spread a message about what you do in the world or even educate people? The third question seems like a simple question, but can often be quite nuanced and quite complicated, which would be when are photos appropriate in the work that you do? You may work in particular areas or have a certain aspect of what you do where photographs aren't the best way to communicate, that maybe an illustration style is more appropriate. Maybe video is the best way to showcase what you do. As we can tell, if an images tell 1,000 words, a video tells 1,000,000 words, or if not more. There can hardly be a better substitute sometimes to immersing people in a particular context than having video be what is used there. And as we found with lots of our clients, in terms of investment, one video or one montage of video clips can go such a long way, whether that be images that you're sourcing or whether it be images that you are creating yourself. Let's talk about visual consistency. What does that look like for your brand? This is where sourcing from a single creator or collaborator or platform can be really helpful, making sure that everything feels visually consistent. The moment that it does not feel visually consistent, whether that be the way that it's edited, the way that it's colored, or the stylistic approach that is being used, uh, that the more that it feels like a dead giveaway for something that is not an original image, that's something that has been sourced. That can be a really quick way to erode trust for an organization if things feel like they are all just stock images that have no kind of meaning or purpose behind their placement. That can often be a dead giveaway and make people distrust an organization. There's ways to create visual consistency. For instance, maybe you found a library of images or have sourced one, and one of the ways that you can do that is by toning them or editing them or using design techniques to make them feel really consistent that are in line with your brand. Whether that be applying some sort of branded color filter or a coloring technique like duotone is a very popular one. That can be another helpful way to create some visual consistency and some brand alignment with some of the images that you're sourcing. Another great way is creating collages of multiple images. Images placed together have such tremendous meaning when you're using them and can often create new meanings. So using that as an effective way to combine images or textures or graphics can be a fun thing to play with. And then also just having a thoughtful approach to image composition and style. Maybe again, it is the composition that you want to be stylistically similar, meaning maybe they're all abstract or textural photos. Maybe they're all up close photos that aren't detailed faces, but are still evocative and feel like they're taking you to a particular place or to a particular interaction. That can all be very thoughtful and can be a way to add consistency to your visual brand. All right, so let's look at some helpful tools. And what I've done, I'm grateful that we're attaching this resource afterwards so that you don't have to jot things down. But these are just tools that I have found that have been tremendously helpful when you're considering stock imagery. Again, whether that be photography, video, or illustrations, or how to treat them. The first one, which is one that is so popular now that I have a hard time believing you haven't heard of it, but which would be Canva, which is just what I would call a mega tool. Canva can do just about anything as a design platform. It has a free service to it as well. It's easy to create graphics, materials through it, and to create branded templates. There's often resources embedded within Canva itself that can make it can make it easier to create consistent materials for your organization or to even source things within the application itself. Canva is one of those that is changing so rapidly that it is getting smarter and smarter and more easy to use. So I have no doubt that by the time you even revisit this tool, that something has changed and has been even more valuable through it. The other thing that I love about Canva is its ability to collaborate, both across an organization and between organizations. So for instance, we often will create resources in Canva in that tool set to be used by partners that we work with and to be extended and sustained over time, which is really helpful. Unsplash. Unsplash is another big repository of photos and visuals. Again, whether that be created graphics, whether that be imagery or illustration, it is something that is a growing repository where people can contribute to it. And there is a mixture of a large amount of images that have been offered for free without any sort of need for licensing. There's also a premium feature where you can source specific imagery from creators for a particular pricing structure that can be really valuable. But again, this is one that has grown from a small community of photographers to thousands and thousands of contributors across the world and across contexts that can be really valuable. Duotone. This is a particular web tool created by an organization called Shape Factory. This is a web-based coloring and toning tool. So if you go to that particular URL, you are able to either source images directly from Unsplash or to upload your own images and to use a particular duotone effect and to add branded colors or branded treatment to it in a way that's really sustainable. This can be a great way to create visual consistency in the images that maybe are provided to you, whether they're user generated, whether they're ones that you're collecting from a variety of sources. Noun Project. This is another free and open source a repository of icons and graphics. This is a user contributed site too, where lots of creators, lots of designers upload different icons and graphics that can be used and placed together. This is super helpful. They span the spectrum of things that are very glyph based. Think things like arrows and symbols that are universal to very detailed illustrations that people offer for a community. It's easy to search by subject and by object. And it is easy to use and to show how people are using that particular resource. Again, it is free to use, often with attribution, and then there is also a premium subscription to it that allows you to use it without attribution too, and to use and download as many resources that you like from it. Pexels. This is another resource similar to some of the ones prior mentioned, where there are just tons of free photos and videos that can be used. And again, this is a great kind of repository to comb through and to see if there's anything that is helpful to use for your particular organization. There's a lot there to explore. So let's talk about the 3 practical tips. I didn't want to leave you with too many. I wanted it to be memorable. So we've got only 3 here that we're going to walk through. First one would be select a sustainable source. This does require you to think about for your organization, how do you define sustainable? Meaning what energy, what time and resources do you put into maintaining this as a content consideration, really? is how do you select a source that can grow with your organization, whether that is supporting or contributing to a platform that is open source that's growing over time, whether that is making sure that you have enough imagery to really cover the breadth of the work that you do. This can be a really helpful way to make sure that you are contributing and using repositories and sources that are growing over time and growing with your particular brand. Consistency is critical. It is so important to building trust, and it often begins with consistent imagery. When you load a web page or you pick up a flyer or you see an advertisement, the first thing you're often paying attention to are the images, especially if they're images of people. And it's really helpful to make sure that you're being consistent with how those are shown, consistent with how you're sourcing them from particular collaborators or platforms, and making sure that it aligns well with your brand mission and the messaging that you're putting out there. Number three, build libraries, not machines. Really, this is a note of equal importance to the brands that you're building, but also to the content that you're creating. In today's time, it can feel like so much pressure to create content and to main content, but to make sure that you've built a really resilient and just helpful library. Often a library of a dozen or two photos can go much further than an endless machine that's churning out content. Especially in the age of artificial intelligence and different tools, it can be tempting to just have an endless array or feed of content, and making sure that you're doing something that feels authentic to the stories that you're telling online and building a library that can be used and sustained over time is really important. I'm so appreciative of this time. As I mentioned, I work at Journey Group. We would love to help you tell stories through your organizations. We really believe that design changes the world for the better, and we love doing that through institutions because we believe that that's the best way to shape and advance human flourishing using design. Here's my contact information. I would love to hear from you. Here's more about our company. Please reach out to us if we could be helpful to you or to just explore some of the work that we're doing with such fantastic partners. I'm very grateful for this time and I'm excited to hear directly from you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Jeremy. We do have a question that's come in from
Wonderful.
Holly. She is asking, when you talk about trust, what do you mean by that?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, And I'll try not to get too metaphorical, I suppose, too, because that's a big whopper of a question. Trust, I would say can be taken in a couple different ways. So let's say that your organization serves a particular community or a cause. Um, Folks feeling like they can trust that you are serving that organization well, or that they have some sort of proof. And again, I don't mean proof necessarily by divulging too much financial information or even sensitive information. Really, I mean that they can tell by your brand, the way that it is offered, or the images that are featured, that you are really working in that particular area or for that cause, or that you're even just being thoughtful about how you're showing it. Often, when I think of, I have had the privilege of serving organizations that have very sensitive causes. Maybe it is they work in an area that is really emotional, or it could be even emotionally triggering to an audience. Making sure that imagery feels appropriate for that particular setting is another way that you can build that trust of saying that this resource feels safe to me. The way to think about it too is not just for people that are supporting your organization, but for people that are using your organization. Let's say that you are a nonprofit that is in a place where you're offering crisis resources. You want to make sure that people can come to that particular tool and feel like they're in a safe place, that it feels like a real place. That's another reason why I included the point about sometimes it's not appropriate to show images, and sometimes it's more helpful to use graphics or to use messaging to send that particular message across, and that using the wrong photo could be erode some of that trust. So really, when I think about that, I think about, especially in the spaces we work within institutions, people want to be able to trust that that institution is doing the work they say they're doing, which again, images are only one part of that, but can often be a first impression for that.
Yeah, that's great. I was even thinking, yeah, if you show up on somebody's website and it's very clearly all stock images, you are going to start to wonder, is this a legit organization? And then
Absolutely.
like things like organizations that help with kind of human trafficking, like how do you visualize that in a way that's appropriate? Yeah, that's excellent. That's good.
Absolutely. And I have been, I'll just mention very briefly that we've worked with so many organizations where I've been so impressed by how thoughtful photojournalists are with that.
Yep.
Especially, I immediately think of World Vision as a great example of how to offer dignity to the people that they're
Yep.
serving, how to capture the context that they're working in with sensitivity is an incredible thing as a designer to be on the receiving end. And I think it's really wonderful when organizations put that amount of care into the images.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, we have another question here from Gwen. She's asking, you said something about mixing stock with custom images. Can
Mhm.
you comment more about how to do that? And also when to decide to use graphics versus photography?
Oh, great. Um, Both really good questions, and two, so many different answers. Um, I think that there are ways to effectively blend custom images and stock images. Often, the times anecdotally that I've seen that most common is when there are particular aspects of a particular brand or organization that are hard to capture or impossible to capture for whatever reason. Let's say that you're working in a part of the world that's really sensitive and you can't capture it or you can't travel there to capture those images. Sometimes being able to use just something that is reflective of that particular region can be really helpful. And then when you do have images that are custom or maybe captured from a context in which you can capture, mixing those in, that's another thing that how you edit them, how you tone them can be another way to build consistency. Another thing that I've seen organizations do really well would be to treat images differently based off of the type of image it is. And a practical example of that would be, let's say that you've got a piece that is a kind of a marketing piece, or maybe you have the homepage of a website, for instance, where you want something that's going to be really immersive from an imagery standpoint. But then you've also got a news section, or you've also got a blog where you're going to feature actual images from a particular story or from a particular place of the world. That's another place where even the style of imagery or how you're treating that image can be a signal to that. So sometimes another example of that would be when you get to the news section, noticing that all of those photos are in color, but
Mm.
everywhere else, some of those branded materials are edited in a different way, or maybe they're toned to look more like a graphic piece. The harder question to answer would be when to use photos and graphics. My favorite thing is to mix the two together. I'm a big, both from a stylistic standpoint and from a communication standpoint, love collages because they blend so many things together. They feel like how we experience the world around us. So I love when you can get really creative with that. I think when I often gravitate more towards graphics or illustrations is when the idea that you're trying to communicate is a bit abstract or complicated. Oftentimes, we have organizations that come to us and really their biggest challenge is messaging, as how to distill what they do in a brief two sentence or couple descriptors. And so oftentimes what we found is that just creating a nice little visual cue for some of the things that they do that may be really complicated are a really helpful way. You've probably seen this on lots of websites or lots of pieces you've interacted with where just having three simple icons symbolize the areas you serve, for instance, or the places, excuse me, that you serve in can be another place to think about that. So again, that's kind of just an example of how you make that determination. Tone can be another one, meaning that if you are wanting to have a more playful tone, often graphics and images can play up that. If you're wanting to have a more serious or understated tone, often images can be distracting from that, and so you maybe want to be more minimal with how you feature particular images.
That's great. We have another question from Stephen. He says, do you know of any stock sources that focus on Christian or mission subjects and themes? I added to the chat. I know that IMB, the International Mission Board for the Southern Baptists, they offer free photos and videos to ministry folks. So the link is posted there. Do you know of any others?
Any others, not right off the top of my head. I know that these are ones that are often popping up and changing so frequently. But what's nice is that I will say in some of the sources that I mentioned, something like an Unsplash, often you can get introduced to a creator through a platform like that, and then find that maybe they have a portfolio that is even more full. For instance, I think of, Pinterest is such a powerful tool for being able to search by descriptors or keywords. Oftentimes, let's say you work in a particular region, you may be able to find someone in country or in region that is capturing images that you could partner with. That's not necessarily a kind of an open source platform, but that could be another way to get to some of those resources. I do know in the past I have seen images pop up, and I know especially in particular missions or ministry contexts, there's often resources for that. It's great that you mentioned that particular source too, Heather, because I know a lot of organizations or even institutions have archives that they offer to people, whether that be a denomination or an organization. I've even seen that be more prevalent on platforms like Unsplash, where maybe a
Mm,
nonprofit brand has offered their photos, or a government agency even. NASA often has lots of photos
mm.
that are offered on sites like that. So there's really creative sources that you can come across. Often collaborating directly with, let's say that you've been on a design site, for instance, and you're looking for inspiration for something that you're creating, often reaching out directly to a creator and asking, hey, these are incredible images. Where did you get them from? I've been so encouraged by how willing people are to share resources that they have, or even cite them and things like descriptions and things like that.
That's great. Yeah, and I would say even to those who are here today, if your ministry is collecting some images and has its own library, consider sharing that with other ministries,
Mhm.
because we can all help each other. Um, we don't have any other questions in the chat, but there was one. No, I think you've covered all of my questions that I wrote down
Great.
during your presentation too.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Jeremy. We're going to do our closing here.